Did you get it? Okay. All right. Okay. Okay, good morning again, everybody. So, sad news, I have no Kahoot today. I already broke that sad news to some of you. But depending on how you performed, you might be relieved. But that was because we have, for this day and the next day, we're starting to wind ourselves down a little bit. We still have a lot to cover, but we also have some assessments and some review and some time for questions, and we have not had a lot of time to let you all go ahead and ask those questions and engage in that way. So we're going to, the morning session is going to include a lot more material, and maybe tomorrow, if I have time to build a Kahoot, I can build one for tomorrow. But if not, that's okay. We're kind of on our last couple of days. So we're going to go ahead and get started today. And today we're really looking at, now I've used some of these terms, we have used these terms since the beginning of the week, some of them. We've looked at things like student-centered pedagogy, what does that mean? And I know we say the word pedagogy sometimes differently. Some of you say pedagogy or pedagogic. We say pedagogy, but you can also say pedagogy. So there's no right or wrong to that. Sometimes it's just a pronunciation that's cultural. So please remember that. But anyway, we've talked a little bit. We're going to talk a lot more about differentiated instruction. We have not talked about universal design. We'll talk a little bit about that. Culturally responsive, we'll talk about what that means. And social emotional development. And then we will try to explore some of these ideas through what does it actually look like in a classroom. So I'm going to start with some time today looking at all of these different principles, but the first one we're going to talk about is the differentiation framework. Now, this comes out of the work of a woman named Carol Ann Tomlinson, and she started this work 25 or more years ago, somewhere around maybe the mid-90s or something like that. And what Carol Ann Tomlinson said was, all of the things we've been saying about how do we address diverse learners, but how do we put it into a systemic graphic that helps us really pin down what we are talking about? Because it's all well and good to say, oh, sure, I believe in meeting the needs and strengths of all of my learners, but it's another thing to say, but how? So Carol Ann Tomlinson came up with a framework. Now, beyond today, if you are interested in this, I share this or a similar chart with most of my students in my classes back home. And I will tell you that the only thing you need to do is a search on Google for Tomlinson differentiated instruction or Tomlinson differentiated framework. And this or a similar chart will show up. So just so you know, it's not, you will always have access if you just search it. The other thing I want to note is that she has evolved this over time, meaning that you will find different iterations of that chart. If you were to Google it, you might find one that's slightly different from this. And you might say, Anita told us it was this kind of a thing, and this looks different. That's because she has evolved with her work over time and has added some pieces, and I'll try to point those out today as we go along. So I'm a little bit more kind of lecture-y today, so we'll find some other ways to do some interactive kinds of things when we get a chance to do that. So I hope that you can read this all right. I know that it's a lot of words on the page, so I'm going to work you through this. When we talk about differentiated instruction, or we can also just say differentiation in the classroom, when we talk about differentiation in the classroom, it is a teacher's proactive response. That means that as teachers, we are critically engaged in being proactive. We're not just maybe doing it, maybe not. Maybe I'm doing it, maybe I'm not. Oh, I did that yesterday, but I didn't really think about it. Proactive means we are actively engaging our minds as teachers to say, how do I meet the needs and strengths of all of my learners? Now, I'm going to tell you one of the little pet peeves I have in education generally and that I also have with this chart. Because this is said, differentiation is a teacher's proactive response to learner needs. Okay. Stop it. I never use the word needs in relation to children without also adding and strengths. Because if we only are perceiving a child through the needs that that child might have, then we've just set, remember our barcode machine? All we did was set it to the needs. And now when I look at that barcode machine, I go, oh, all these needs. So I don't ever think, and I say never, again, don't back ourselves into corners. Let's say I try my very best. Let's not say that I'm 100%, but I try my best to, whenever I hear the word needs, I also say and strengths. So you all are going to add and strengths. I'm going to say learner needs, you're going to say and strengths. Are you ready? Learner needs and strengths. I'm going to use it in a sentence. I'm going to just say something off the top of my head here. Wow, these kids really have a lot of needs. Boy, this child, we really need to get them into some programming that addresses their needs. Okay? Please don't ever forget that. I've been in a lot of school systems that have what's called a special needs unit, I believe they call them. Is that what they're called in some of the schools here? Whenever you see a sign in a school that says special needs unit, in your mind you're going to say, and if you work at that school or are a leader at that school or have anything to say or do at that school, you're going to go to the people and very politely say, could we maybe think about how we add wording here and strength? Could we maybe think about the ways in which we build our wording? Our words speak volumes, and particularly for those kids. Imagine if at the front of this door, right at the front of it, I said, welcome, students with needs. And that's what I said. But the other one across the way says, students with strengths. You guys all got into this room. Words say everything, and kids and adults and teenagers know it. Okay? So please remember that. I've also been in some schools that say that there's a room for what we call the uneducable. What does that mean? Does anybody know? Have you ever seen that before? I have. Uneducable. So the assumption is they can't be educated at all, right? Like, remember when we build on prior knowledge? That's assuming there is not anything there. Okay, so be careful. Our words say a lot. Remember one of the days I talked with you about the fact that even the word special education, that word special, right? What does that mean? What does that mean to be special, right? So words say a lot, because you might say I got a special award and I might be like, wow, that's great. Or you might say I'm in special education and that means that I'm special in a different way, right? So how do we use that word? So anyway, we can't solve all these, we ourselves can't ride in with a white horse and solve all of that, but we can at least be thinking about it in our own heads. So I always want you to say learners' needs and strengths whenever you think about that. Even in conversation with others, if somebody says, well, they have this child that has a lot of needs, you're going to say, right? We don't deny that there are needs. We add to that and say our barcode machine is set for all of that, okay? Because guess what? We all have needs too, and we also all have strengths. Okay, so differentiation then becomes the teacher's proactive, that is engaged, response to learners' needs and strengths. So seeing each child in my barcode machine as that whole complex being. It's shaped by mindset. This is a new addition to her, well, newer. Let's just say when I say new, I'm talking about maybe the last 10 years or so. Shaped by mindset, meaning, again, that proactive piece of the teacher, that in fact, the way I have my mindset coming into the room, how do I set my barcode machine? has a lot to do with how I'm going to interact with each of my students, okay? And it's guided by general principles of differentiation. So what are those general principles? Well, and again, this top part is all kind of added over the last few years. You can find charts that actually kind of start about here. And that's fine. Those are good charts too. I like both of them. Sometimes I feel like this is a lot to try to wrap our heads around, but it's fine. It's fine, either one. I'm just telling you there are options out there when you consider, if you look this up, you'll find a lot of different formats. So let's just, I'm going to actually come back to that yellow row because I want to keep thinking about what we're doing with students in the classroom. So we're going to skip this for now, the general principles, but there are some we want to keep thinking about. Let's move on though. Teachers can differentiate, that is, that I can make different. So the word differentiate has the word different in it, or differ. So every one of us differs from the next for a whole bunch of different reasons. And I can differentiate what I do with you through a number of different things. And I really do, I'm sorry if you can't read this. My eyes are pretty bad, so this is a little hard even for me. Through content, let's think about that. What is the content of this course? Anybody? Just tell me what is the content of this course right now that you're taking? What is it? Education. What's some key learning that you are taking away with you?
How to make education in such an approach that everybody gets, like nobody's left, everybody's included.
That everybody gets included. So inclusion.
Making it easy for everyone.
Exactly, right. And so great. That's a great lesson of our week together, right? Inclusive practices. Yes.
And how we can modify the traditional pedagogies we've been using since years for including everyone in the education, what she said.
Exactly. So we can then layer that with pedagogies and strategies. Differentiation is one of the pieces of content, right? So we have what we're learning. So the content is the what. So if you're teaching science, you've got these things you need to cover, okay? If you're teaching language arts, you've got these things you're supposed to cover. What we're covering are all the things you all have just talked about, okay? So that's our content. Now here's the thing, as a teacher, I need to be very careful about this. I don't want to vary my content too much. I can't say, well, you all are in this course, but you know what? I think just these two are just going to learn about building a lesson plan. That's what they're going to do. Because we're going to get into this a little later. I have a cartoon to show you, and we are going to do an interactive activity with that. But I'm going to say that these two right here are just building a lesson plan. You all are doing some other things, but that's what they're doing. Now, you could say, well, that was great, Anita. You adapted your content for them. But what I'm going to tell you is then they're not really getting the content of the course, are they? Now, it might be nice for them, and they may actually need that, and they may need to adjust within their zone of proximal development. But I need to be very careful. I can adapt that content. When I adapt the content, I still want to hold on to my standards. So let me give you some examples. When I was teaching, I taught for many years, I taught 10th grade English language arts. And I had a class, or I often had a class, this is not, I'm thinking of one in particular, but it could be any, where I asked them to write a short answer comparing this character with this character in a book. So they just needed to compare those characters, right? And they needed to draw some connections. Now, I had some students in that class that could not write a full paragraph on that. But the point that I needed them to think about was, how do they think about the differences between the characters? So what I did instead was I told them that they could bullet point 3 things about this character and 3 things about this character. I was slightly adapting based on zone of proximal development for those couple of students who needed it. Another example, I often taught irony. So I don't know if you all learn about irony in your classes, but it was a big part of my curriculum, that there are different types of irony, and we won't do a lesson on irony today. But I used to love teaching about irony because it's one of those things that's a little bit higher skill to think about what irony is. So I had students where I would give them an example from what we had read, and I would say, what kind of irony is this? And there were 3 choices, and why? but there were some students who couldn't get to that why. They could tell me what it was, or they could make a pretty good guess, but they couldn't tell me why. So for those couple of students, I could modify based on what I know. I can either fail them for not knowing the why, or I can, are they going to earn top marks on everything? No, but I can be very fair about saying to them, you know what, why don't you just point out what you think the irony is and not worry about the why. Now the person next door says, that's not fair, I had to do the why. All right, well, my response to that is, first of all, you're not the one in charge of those decisions, so move on. Nothing to see here, folks, right? My second response to that is, you can come and talk to me privately if you think you also need that accommodation. Because usually people are going to be like, no, I actually don't need that accommodation. Right, that's what I thought. But you can come talk to me if you think you do. And the third thing I say is, you can also come and talk to me privately about how and when and why I might make decisions, which I don't always need to share with you, by the way. But I could if you'd like that conversation. I won't do it publicly. I won't do it here. We can have that conversation. There were times that I did have people take me up, students that would take me up on that. Yeah, I really want to know more about this. And I'd say, okay, how well are you doing? How well is somebody else doing? It's not a comparison. I don't ever point out a student's, progress. But I say, what would it take to succeed with the content that we have if there was a struggle involved? And usually students can work their way to that. In fact, even young children, when I taught first grade, I told you that I taught first grade. And even there we could say, when students were saying, well, I'm doing this differently, I'd say, yeah, that's right. You're a different person. And so that's the way we do that. Now, we do have to be careful, and that's why I say we still need the same content. We also are going to want to have the same standards that get met. We are not changing our standards. If my standards in this room is that you all need to work on this assessment later that you're getting today, and you need to know some certain content, that doesn't change for anybody. But some of what I can adapt is how I'm meeting you within that zone of proximal development. Now, the process can also change, and some of the examples I've used are also a change in process. So instead of building an essay, maybe you do a Venn diagram to compare something. Or maybe instead of an exam, you act something out, or you write a story, or maybe you build a project, okay? So there are many, many ways to differentiate. Well, that's actually product, sorry, I jumped the gun here a little bit. Process would be how we're getting there, but those are very entwined. So the thing is that none of these are just lockstep, right? I mean, a lot of this is intertwined. So the process is how we make sense of it. So have you ever been in a class, let's say a math class, where a teacher might say, well, you need to do this process this way, but the student will say, well, I got the right answer, but I did it this way, right? So very often we need to learn a process because it helps us later. Like, yes, well, you did do it that way, but you need to know this process as well. But sometimes we use a different process to get to the same kind of thing. Do any of you know the stories? They're written for young kids, like elementary. They're called Wayside School stories. Has anybody heard of those? Well, they are hilarious. And they're about this classroom full of kids. It's absurd. It's just ridiculous. And it's maybe geared for like 4th, 5th, 6th graders. But one of the chapters is a little boy who is learning to do math, and he's learning how to add things together. And he always gets the right answer every single time, but he never does it the way the teacher tells him to do it. So the teacher keeps him in for recess and keeps him after school and tells him, and it's very ridiculous. It's like he can't ever go home until he figures out. It's just really ridiculous stuff. The teacher says to him, you can't go home, you can't do anything else until you figure out how to do this process. So he learns to do the process, but he gets the wrong answer every time. And so it's just a play on this idea of how did this child figure things out? Well, something in that child's head allowed him to, I mean, it's written with the absurdity, but he'll say something like, if she says, what is 2 plus 4? He'll say, 7 plus 3 is, 6. And he always gets the right answer, but whatever's going on in his head is different. So it's very clever. The point is that sometimes we take a different process, but as a teacher, I can actually highlight that and tell you, you may have a different process. So you all are taking notes by hand, but I might say to you, go ahead and pull a computer out. In my own classrooms, I tell my students, you may have your computer out and take notes that way. Because process-wise, for a lot of people, especially if you have disability, especially if you're used to you're used to working on a computer, okay? What I do tell them is that anything on that screen needs to be 100% course related. So you are to shut everything else down and be on body, mind, and spirit present on that screen. But that's a process you could use. You might have somebody else who takes notes for you. That's part of process, right? So as a teacher, I can help by saying, is there another way that we can help get you to some of those same results? We're going to come back to that idea later. I talked briefly about product. I didn't mean to confuse everybody, but a product could look different for each person. That's where I'm saying you could do a project, you could do a paper, you could do. Now, sometimes a teacher says, today we're doing a reading quiz. This is what I do in my classes. I'll say, you have a reading quiz to do. I'm going to tell you something about when I give reading quizzes at the college level, actually even at the high school level, but now it's all online. I tell them, take it on your own. You don't need to do it in class time. You can do it on your own. You may use any of the materials you have, because that's what we do in the real world. We use our materials, okay? You can always use any materials you have to take those quizzes. Not only that, but you get 2 tries, and I will always take the higher score. So you automatically, it's built into my system, in the course management system, to allow 2 tries and to always take the higher score. You can have as much time as you need within reason. So I set the clock for like 45 minutes, which is plenty of time. Most of them do it in about 20, but it gives plenty of time for somebody who might have a disability or read more slowly or things like that. Okay, and they also have a choice. If something really goes awry, they can talk with me and we can talk about why, and I always have discretion to open a quiz back up again if I need to for a student. I very seldom need to do that, okay? Because I don't want to trick my students and I don't want to set them up to fail. But they need to know their stuff, right? Now, I'm just going to use this as an example because that quiz is one that everybody has to take. You don't get to say, can I do something other than a quiz? You said product, but I will tell you this, that the next time we do a reading review, we won't do a quiz. We'll do a template that you fill out. And this time you fill out a template looking at the readings, give me the main idea, you give me a few quotes, you make a couple of connections, and you ask a question. I am differentiating the product in the way that I think some of my students are much going to prefer that template. Some of my students are going to prefer the quizzes. So even as a teacher, I may not necessarily say, no, you don't have to take that quiz. I might say you do have to, but the next time around, I will better meet your way of thinking about how you learn, okay? So the product can be varied based on just sort of generally over time, or maybe I do it this way this time I do it this way. Hopefully, sometimes we do group activities and that works great for people. Sometimes we do full-on lecture and that works better for people. So I can vary how and what we do. But there's another thing I've done. So when I teach my class in special education, they have a project that they do. It is highly differentiated. I mean highly. I might have 28 students in that class, which I know sounds low to you, but for me, that's a pretty good sized class. And I ask them all to create a product, whatever they choose, and I have a whole list that they can choose from, and they need to meet certain standards no matter what they choose. They need to show me some research that they've done. They need to have depth and breadth. They need to have a connection to either the self or the work they've done in the field placements. And there's something else, I don't know, grammar and mechanics and so on. But they have a wide range of how they engage. First of all, they have a choice of topic. That's a big one. So they have choice in what they study and think about. The second thing is that they can pick any kind of product that they want. So they could write a children's story, or they could create pamphlets for parents, or they can write a traditional paper. Sometimes that would probably be me. I'd be like, just let me write the paper. I'm really good with that. They could do an art project. I had one student one time who danced her presentation. We all went over to the dance studio and she danced. She had some friends that she brought on board to help with that presentation. I've had people create materials for classrooms. I've had people build gardens that express, and it's all, these 4 standards stay exactly the same. They never change. They have to do the research, they have to have depth and breadth, they have to have it be pertaining to the course in a way that shows their learning of the course and so on. But their product is highly differentiated. That is the most differentiated thing I do in the work that I do in my classes. It's probably the example, and it took me a few years to really feel like I had it figured out well enough so that I felt that it was equitable and I felt that it was getting at that depth. So I have very clear criteria, and I also have it set up so that they need to have a certain amount that gets included, a certain number of research papers that they look at, and so on. So that is a highly differentiated project. Again, unusual. I don't do that in all of my classes. That is the one class that I really do it in. Now, I can also differentiate the affect or the environment. What does that mean? That I might shake up things in terms of how I think about my students in the room based on how it feels, what it looks like, my own attitude towards somebody. So let's suppose that we have the same content, or I can modify these things, but I'm still treating you differently. And again, remember when I use an example, I'm not picking on anybody, right? I'm using it as an example. So here's what I mean by that, okay? My affect is my way of being, that my emotional response, right? So somebody comes in, hi, it's so nice to see you. How are you doing? Oh, you need a little extra help on that? Oh, what are you doing over here? I can't even believe it. Okay, whatever. I'm not even going to look at that right now. Oh, hi, how are you doing? Right? So, I mean, I'm exaggerating this, but the point is that my affect also sends a message to students, and I can always be in control of that. I am in control of that, okay? Which means that if this student is really irritating me, or I really am annoyed that she's drawing cartoons or notes to her neighbor, right? Or whatever it is, I still am in control of my affect towards her. So I can say to her something like, I'm really glad to see you today. You look really pretty. I love that outfit. Can we make sure we're staying focused today, right? My affect tells her that I value her as a human being. I don't like that she's off track or whatever it is she's doing. And please forgive me, I'm just using this. You all know this, right? My students are so used to me doing this. I'm always like this. And it's usually the ones that are sitting close, because those are the ones I can get to. So you see, the affect is where that's something that Carol Ann Tomlinson added later. Because the realization is that, in fact, some kids, we can do all of this and somebody can still come in and feel that they're not included, right? Environment means things like how we set the chairs up, maybe the posters that are on the walls. I'm always looking at these back bulletin boards. Has to do with whether, you see, this poster says we really value this session. It's been printed out nicely. There's a value given. It's got information on it that's really important. So environment also is good, okay, for people coming in to feel safe, comfortable, and belonging. And that's part of inclusion, okay? So she added that one later, which I love. I love that she added that. I think that's, actually, sometimes you see these as two separate ones, but her point is that there's this whole other nebulous whatever that's happening, right? All right, and we do have choices we make in that space. All right, breathe for a second. Okay, I want you to turn and talk to your neighbor about any one of these things and how you might, actually, let's not do affect, do either content, process, or product. Turn to your neighbor about how you might see that playing out in something that you are doing, have done, that you teach, or that you're in a class for. Where might you see a differentiation of one of those things? Where might you see a differentiation? I've got someone off the back there. Can you make sure she's... In something you're actually doing, a class you're taking or a class you're teaching, where might you find a way to differentiate one of these things if you were in control of that class? Right now, as a student, you're not necessarily in control of those decisions, but pretend that you are.
I found very better statement for the content of this course.
Okay.
Educating to educate.
There you go. I love that. Exactly. And I'm always telling people, I want you to learn how to learn. Yeah. Right? Like, if I'm learning how to teach, no, you're learning how to learn. Exactly. That's right. Very good. Yeah. I love it. Okay, let's circle back. Now, in asking you to do that, here's the thing. I am not you. I am not in the Indian context. I'm not in your classrooms. I'm not teaching the courses that some of you are teaching. I'm not taking the courses that some of you are taking. So when we have to ask, the hard question is, it's all well and good for Anita to stand up here and say it, but it's a very different matter to say, wait a minute, what does that actually mean? What does it really look like or feel like? And I don't know. Okay, this is where you teach me, because I don't know. I do know this, that if somebody were to say to me, that's impossible in the context that I have, I will tell you I don't actually believe that. I've been in a lot of situations where I thought it might be impossible, and I'm not a big fan of that, because I think that's a quick way to shut down what we could actually do. Okay, is it possible to the absolute nth degree? Remember, we're not looking for 100% perfection. We're looking for the fact that if we try a little bit, we might get to 50% or 60% or 70%, right? And the rest is gravy, as we say, okay? Which means that if we can get more than that, that's great. But if we don't try, we don't get anywhere with it, right? So this is about making clear, articulate, mindful decisions. So I would love to get a couple of examples. It can be from any of these categories. And I'd love to hear from both a teaching perspective and a student perspective on this. So I know, how many of you are actually teachers teaching something in any capacity? Okay, I've got you three here, and you, yep. Okay, any capacity if you're a teacher in any way, yep. And then the rest of you are students in some capacity, correct? Okay, let's hear from a student perspective. Anybody from the student perspective, what did you think about? Yes.
In our first year, we had a subject called sociology, and we had to, at the end of our final assessment was based around us explaining a concept.
Yes.
We had chosen entirely ourselves. It was based on, like you said, two different ways. So it
Yes.
was related to product.
Very nice. And you had a choice.
We had a choice to choose the subject, how we chose to present it.
Very nice. A choice of subject, how you present it. That's great.
Clear parameters.
There you go. Right, exactly. You had parameters you had to follow and some standards you had to meet. You couldn't just go out and do anything you wanted, right? So that is a great example. Thank you. Yes.
Even for our social psychology assignment, we
Yep.
had the freedom to present however we want to.
Good.
So many of us put up performances, dance, singing.
There you go. Oh, wow. That's fantastic. I'm really glad to hear that. That's really great. So you could even choose the format that you chose to do that in. Yes.
So for in experimental psychology, we had assignment that we were given dates which had events in psychology.
Yes.
So we could choose any date and we could present the information that we knew in any way.
Really nice. Really
A
nice.
story, a presentation, a report.
That's amazing. That's wonderful. These are great examples. And these are actual examples, because one of the things I thought is that some of you might think about what you could do but is not happening. That's another thought, like, well, they could have done it this way, right? Or we could have done it this way. But these are real examples that are coming through that show really nice examples. How about from a teacher perspective?
So I'm from design background, so I'm usually teaching very creative lot of students. So they have such great aesthetic appeal to their work. And
Yes, yes.
They have their own say in what topics they want to choose.
Okay.
Most of the time. So for example, I was teaching the subject packaging design.
Okay.
So the content has to be followed. Like, this is what I need to
Yes,
cover.
exactly.
And there was a certain process throughout the design process.
Right.
But then I gave them choice, like they can either do it for a toy or a luxury product.
Okay,
So
great.
the product was different, but
Right.
it was more inclined towards their inclination.
Towards their inclinations and their interests, and the content stayed the same. That's a great example. So anybody else want to share anything? Yes.
So we have Hindi, and for that, when the facilitator started with the thing, they asked us, "Oh, should we cover this? Should we do this as our assignment?"
Oh, there you go.
Afterwards,
I love that.
everybody
That's a nice example. So sometimes a professor even says, what would you all like to cover? Or I do that too in my classes. I have a class I'm teaching next fall, And it's a group of seniors, and I really trust my seniors. I trust them a lot. They've been through this program. They know what's best for them. They're all heading off into different parts of their careers and so on. And so I've asked them, and I'm teaching the class for the first time. So I have a basic structure and I have some ideas, but I plan, and I've already asked some of them. I've met with lunch with some of them, and I've said to them exactly that. What would you like to have this course be for you? What will help you most in looking at this class? Now, again, context is everything. I don't know that I could do that with incoming, but I don't know if they have enough sense of like, where am I going? What am I doing with this? Whereas my seniors are saying, I'm taking this class as a capstone. So what does that mean to you? What do you want to have it be? Now, of course, I have discretion. I am still coming in with a certain amount of legitimate authority, right? Which is another whole topic of conversation. But the bottom line is I can give my students some voice and some choice in that. And next fall, as we're teaching, I hope to be able to do that as well, to say to students, I'm thinking of doing it this way. Does that work for you? You know what will happen is some of them say, that works great for me, and others will, that doesn't work at all for me. And then the next question is, so what do we do about that, right? How do we kind of resolve that? Invariably, somebody says, I love doing all the group things. Somebody else says, I don't like that we're doing all this group stuff. So we have to figure out, which is why we have to vary it sometimes to make sure we're making everybody a little bit happy some of the time, right? So good example there. Any other examples that anybody would like to share?
So as a teacher, since many years we've been introducing art integration in our subjects.
Oh, art integration.
So here to 11th and 12th graders, we are giving them a freedom of choice in the topic. For example, I teach maths.
Yes.
They choose a topic in mathematics and they're presenting how that maths topic is related to that integration of, artistic way.
That's
they present
great.
That. For example, Fibonacci ways they will present.
Yes.
Or some designing construction part.
Right, right.
Some
right.
sequences in the nature. The
Yes, yes,
so
exactly. Oh, that's wonderful because, art and math are really quite aligned. I've taught, I've had students that have done teaching, they're studying to be teachers of math, and I always suggest, math is all around us. I used to be very, I'm going to admit it here, but I used to be a little bit afraid of the sciences, a little bit, okay? But then I realized, okay, but I'm doing science every day. I'm breathing, and I'm seeing nature around me. Now, I don't always know how to articulate every piece of that, but I'm living in the world. Again, if we're living in the world, we can find ways to make meaning that makes meaning for us. Now, I want to give one caution here. These are all great examples, and it's a caution I've had to take myself to heart, okay? If I have so differentiated my product that you are doing a dance for me, you're writing a traditional paper for me, you are going to do a children's book, and you are making a pamphlet for parents, which are all examples that could happen, I must be crystal clear, and we're going to talk about assessment tomorrow. I must be crystal clear about what I am assessing each person on. Because if I'm assessing on how beautiful the product is, the traditional paper isn't beautiful. It doesn't have color. It doesn't have special, edges to it. It doesn't have sparkle. It's a traditional paper. If I say I need to see something written, then my dance person may be at a disadvantage. Now I can solve that because I can tell my dance person to please write 2 paragraphs or 3 or 4 that explain the dance. So I can actually build that in. My point is that if I am truly grading on the 4 criteria that I have for that class, which I do, then I cannot ask them to be perfect artists. I cannot ask them to get their edges straight on their projects. I can have a category that I call extra or above and beyond or something that gives that little oomph. And that's my discretion. I can have a little discretion there, and I feel okay doing that because I think sometimes we can recognize that, okay? But can I give a little oomph or discretion on a paper? Sure, I can. Maybe it's in the number of sources, or maybe it's in the way that it's been portrayed, or maybe it's in the way that it's been built. So my point is this. When we differentiate a product, we must always hold on to the same standards that we've set for everyone, and they need to be the standards that tie to our content. If I'm teaching math and integrate arts into the math, then I cannot have a content standard be that you have suddenly figured out art that you're suddenly artistic, right? That's not why you're in the class. You see what I'm saying? So we have to always be careful of that, myself included, which was one of the challenges I had the more we differentiate, the more we have to remember that point. Because when I've got a paper that somebody's written and a pamphlet for parents and a dance that's been done, or somebody did a sensory garden one time, I need to make extra sure that every one of these people is being assessed on the same standards. That is important. I don't differentiate my standards. Now, I will also say there's no such thing as an absolute, and there are times I may differentiate a standard, but it would probably need to be somebody who has a specialized plan set up or who has made an accommodation through other services. Maybe they have a major health issue or something like that, right? So I'm not saying never, but I'm saying be very careful about that, because I've seen people get points off. My own kids have had points taken off for things that are not about the content, okay? One example, and I'll just digress slightly here. My son on the autism spectrum, he has a very hard time. So in chemistry, he's older now, but when he was in chemistry class in high school, his chemistry teacher, he was failing his labs, but he knew that chemistry, backwards, forwards, and upside down. He knew everything about the chemistry. So when I asked him, and when I asked to see these labs and why he was failing these labs, what was happening was he was losing points. He didn't know his lab partners' names, so he couldn't write them on the form. So he'd lose 5 points for not putting his lab partners' names. Now, for somebody on the autism spectrum, so for any of us, if I said, can you find, I don't know, some of you may be on the autism spectrum, but let's say that for many of us in this room, if I said, can you name your lab partners, you either know each other well enough, or you know how to ask that question. What's your name again, right? Write it down. I mean, how many times do I ask you all your names? 100 times, right? Because I'm not afraid to ask that because I know I need to do that. Somebody on the autism spectrum has no idea how to ask that question. So my son said to me, how does anybody know the name of their lab partners? And I said, do you know the kids in your class? He goes, not the ones I'm lab partner with. And I said, how could you find it out? And he said, I don't know. So he's being punished for something that's not a standard. Like, can you leave chemistry never knowing your lab partners' names? Yes. Does it have to do with whether he can know chemistry? Not really. The teacher's argument was that to build a lab report, you need certain things on it. Then I said then he needs structured, scaffolded support to get those names on that paper. That might mean that you hand him a piece of paper with those names on it. Write those on down, those are your names. It might be that you just forget about taking those points off and just say, do your best. It might be that you tell the entire class, could you all please mention your first name to each other every single time you sit together? And some student might go, that's stupid, I know everybody. And you say, I don't care, that's what we're doing, we're making sure. There are ways to do this that do not punish for something that's arbitrary. So please be very careful about the standards you set, because in classrooms, these things happen all the time. I mean, all the time. And they happen whether we're in the US or whether we're in India or no matter where we are, because we're human and because we forget that somebody may have trouble finding lab partner names, okay? There were other things that he was losing points for as well that were just as arbitrary. One of the things that was very important to the teacher was that he capitalized, and again, I'm not a chemistry person, but he needed to capitalize the names of the, I don't know what they were, the elements or something or other, whatever they were working with. And I understand that may be form that needs to happen. The teacher told me that is form, it needs to happen. I said, okay, that's fine. But he was missing every capitalization, which means that he was missing it, let's say 10 times. But that's not 10 points off, that should be 2 points off. You've got to get it done, but if you are consistently doing that all the way through your paper, that's not about whether he knows the chemistry or not. So that was another thing we talked about, was how do we ask him? Now again, a teacher may say, could we all make sure we capitalize? Could you double check your papers? Or knowing that that person has trouble, I might say to this person, double check this for capitalization before you hand it in, okay? Those are the things I'm talking about. We need to just be careful that we don't change that and what we're trying to measure, right? Okay, and then we do this according to students' readiness. How ready are they to do that? The example I just gave, somebody on the autism spectrum may not be ready to find lab partner names, so they may need that scaffolded support based on students' interests. So those of you that have shared examples of choice, You get to pick, oh my gosh, you mean I get to do this? Or, oh wow, I really want to study this. That's basing it on student interest. The other way we can base it on interest is to get to know each other. And the more I get to know you, so this week I've gotten to know some of you in different capacities. I know that some of you have a theater interest. Maybe I can use that. Maybe I know that this student who's my troublemaker today, right here, maybe this person has a real interest in what you all call football. I would call it soccer, but football, maybe I can build some examples in that have to do with football. Or better yet, maybe I can ask her to give me some examples for football. How does this relate to football? Tell me again, right? I can learn from that. But I need to know that she likes football before I can do that. So the more I can get to know, you might even do an interest survey. Everybody write down 3 things that are your passions, 2 things you want to learn about, and 1 question you have that you've had since you were a child that you want an answer to. That's right off the top of my head, spitballing here, but you can find ways to figure out more of student interest. And then learning preferences, and this one is sort of more like what your style is. Again, learning preferences for the quizzes, reading reviews, some people want those quizzes, some want the template. Some want the lecture, some want the group work, right? Some want to just do it on their own, and some want to actually collaborate with others. We all have different styles, okay, and preferences for that. Sometimes I've given work where I say, take a few minutes to work on this, and somebody says, I really prefer to do this on my own where I can find my, space. We all have preferences for how we want to. How many of you are morning people? You want to get right up out of bed early in the morning and get some work done. Raise your hand if you're a morning person, an early bird. Raise your hand if you just find your second wind about 10 o'clock at night and you're ready to just go. Raise your hand if you think you're a night owl. I'm in the night owl category. How many of you aren't necessarily either one of those things? Okay, let's keep going. You with me? All right, good job. So we're sometimes night owls. We are sometimes morning early birds. We are sometimes in between, right? Sometimes we just have that afternoon time that works best for us. Sometimes we like to be alone. How many of you like to listen to music or something else while you're studying? How many of you definitely do not like to do that? I don't. Most of you do like to. I find it distracting, although I have found some peaceful music. I find focus music, and that helps me a little bit. But even that irritates me after a while. Stop it. I just want to get my work done, get inside my head. Yeah. Okay. Those are all learning preferences. How many of you want to be in kind of a rigid setup with a chair and kind of in a place that's sort of a little bit more study-ish to get your work done? Anybody feel that? How many of you want to just kind of hang out in a cozy, comfy chair or in your bed or something? Yeah. So again, the point is, obviously, as a teacher, I don't manage most of those things. But I'm telling you that we all have ways of being that we learn. We all have ways of being that make us feel that we are at our best for learning, okay? And some of those things I can control in the classroom. Lighting is often very problematic in classrooms, actually, across the universe, because of the fact that some of these lights are very harsh and they're hard on the eyes. So I've seen classroom teachers, I have actually not done this, but they bring in floor lamps because it's a softer light. And they bring in floor lamps for kids to learn with instead of and they turn off the overhead lights. Sometimes these lights, for people with autism, they can actually see the flicker in them, depending on the kind of light that it is. Most of us can't pick that out, but autistic kids actually can. And so that can create migraines and a lot of other things. So it's just something to think about. There's so many aspects, right? Are we going to hit it all? Of course we're not. All right. So this is what, and you can ignore this part. These are just strategies that you all are already thinking about. I told you we'd come back to this. So we're going to kind of wrap up here in just a minute. But basically, we have an invitational learning environment. You are all welcome. You are all invited to this space. You're not only invited, you are wanted. I want to see you here, right? Quality curriculum. I want you to feel that you're getting quality out of that. Assessment that informs teaching and learning. We're going to talk about assessment later. Instruction that responds to student variance. That's what we've all been talking about the whole time. Leading and managing a flexible classroom. And flexible partly just means that I mix you up, that I make sure that we have different ways of doing things. We've already talked about most of that. All right, how much time do I need to close out here for a bit? Okay, so we're going to do a quick other couple of things. So universal design is another way of framing differentiation. These are all different ways of framing similar things. You're going to start to see, you're going to say, wait, didn't we just talk about this? Universal design was actually originally for environments, buildings. It was an environmental design. But it's been used now for education because universal design says this: if it's good for one person, it's probably good for more than one person. So let's use the example of my son not knowing lab partner names. If I say to the entire class, every time you get into your lab groups, could you please reintroduce yourself to each other with a first name? And if everybody says, we've done that 40 times, I don't care, that's great. Because guess what? My kid may not be the only one who actually doesn't quite remember, or who just forgot and should probably know somebody. Every single time that I would get into a lab group with you all, I would probably want you all to repeat your names to me, okay? Imagine if you have a child that's come in, again, remember I told you we have a great number of people from sub-Saharan African countries that have come into our local school system. Imagine if the sounds of the names are different. So for you all, your names are very different sounding for me, okay? Imagine if all of the names are different and I have to put them onto a lab report, and I'm from a country where these names just mean nothing to me. I don't know what the names are. I don't know how to pronounce them. I don't know how to, it's just very different, right? So what works for one may work for many. How about if I have a visually impaired student who needs 14-point font? How many of you would prefer material in 14-point font as opposed to 12? I mean, a lot of us. I would really prefer it. I find myself blowing things up on the computer all the time. I find 14-point much, much easier than 12-point font. So if it works for one, so I might just say, here, you get this. You're the one who gets this in 14-point font. Everybody else gets it in 12. Why not just give everybody 14-point font if I'm doing it for one person? So universal design says, and actually when it came out of things like playground design, part of it was that like those pebbles are really hard for wheelchairs and things like that. Sometimes playgrounds have the pebbly stuff. So now it's sort of those rubberized mats in most playgrounds, because rubberized mats work for everybody. Okay, I have a little cartoon to show you here. So anyway, it's basically about, is whatever you're doing inclusive? Is it accessible? And is it usable? And basically, again, some of the visual aids, choice and voice, we've talked about a lot of this, right? Real life connections, larger print, accessible space, quiet spaces. I might say, you really need a quiet space today. Can you go over into that corner and kind of just use that space? But somebody else over here might go, can I use that space? Can I use that corner? No, I'm sorry. She's the only one that gets a quiet space. Yes, of course. Go use that corner. Somebody else says, I also need a quiet space. And then I might say, does everybody? Let's find a space, right? But I might also say, she's not the only one that might benefit from a quiet space, right? Okay, so these are the kinds of things, again, mentioning the lighting and accessibility, right? If somebody says I really need to be able to get up and down quickly and accessibly, then I can maybe adapt my classroom to make sure that that's happening, all right? So here's a cartoon, and just to get your head around this, because you all aren't used to snowy environments, this works great for me because I have snow all winter long. Here's a bunch of snowy steps going up into a school. These are the kids all waiting to get in. Here's somebody in a wheelchair. Here's other kids. Here's the person who's shoveling. And the child in the wheelchair says, could you please shovel the ramp? So you can see there's a ramp up here. And this person says, all these other kids are waiting to use the stairs. When I get through shoveling them off, I'll clear the ramp for you. And this child says, but if you shovel the ramp, we can all get in. So this is a perfect illustration of universal design. This person saying, I'm clearing the steps and then I'll get to the ramp. The ramp is for everybody. Anybody can use that ramp, but only some people can use the stairs. So it's a really nice illustration. And we can, again, remember, I'm all about the metaphor. We can use this metaphorically, can't we? We could say, for example, am I clearing the stairs where I could clear a ramp, right? Am I maybe putting up obstacles for some kids where I don't need to? Right? Why always have this one be late to school when we could just shovel the ramp and everybody would be fine, right? Metaphorically, I want you to take this one step further. I want you to be thinking a little bit about what does it mean to clear the ramp first, metaphorically. 14-point font might be a way to clear the ramp, right? Instead of deciding that, well, this is good for some people, figure out what's the adaptation and does it help everybody? Okay, and again, everybody's a big word. It might not help everybody, but it probably will help a lot of people. That's the essence then, right? Any thoughts or questions about this? So universal design is just another way to think of it. And another one is culturally responsive, which you may have heard of before. I've probably used it myself, but culturally responsive pedagogy, you sometimes hear it as CRL, which is critically responsive what? CRL would be critically responsive learning. You might hear it as CRT, which is critically responsive teaching. We might hear it as CRP, which is pedagogy. So you might hear any or all of those. Culturally responsive is the key part there. Now, there's something more. If somebody's coming in with another language, let's say, or another culture or another belief system, I can be responsive, but there's more. I like to think of it as being more than just responsive. Oh, really? You do that? Well, maybe I can actually be culturally celebrating. So we sometimes talk about culturally sustaining. So I'm not being responsive just means you're telling me something and I'm responding to. How about if I'm ahead of the game? How about if I'm proactive? How about if I not only say, oh, that's nice, thank you for sharing that example from your experiences. How about if I do a little work ahead of time and find out what some of your experiences might be and then use those from my teacher voice to be not only responsive, but sustaining and celebrating. Okay, that's my word, celebrating. But I think of it as you're coming in here with your gaps and your needs. Exactly. So if I'm just waiting for you and I'm responding, that's not enough. So we often hear culturally responsive. In my head, just like adding the and strengths, I like to think, wait a minute. I don't need to be just responsive. I need to be ahead of the game. Okay? So again, it means teaching using students' customs, characteristics, experiences, perspectives as tools for better classroom instruction. Let me give you another example. We have a lot of Muslim students that have come from Somalia and other parts of sub-Saharan Africa. We are not in an area of the country or of the state where people are familiar with that historically. It's just not something that Maine really ever accommodated. So one of the things that started happening is that schools were really ignorant about many of the Muslim traditions and expectations, things like, for example, Ramadan, or things like the fact that some animals are not clean according to certain, like dogs in homes are very uncommon because of cleanliness kinds of concerns and things like that. It has to do with some of the rules, some of the religious laws around that. So what happened was that schools were, for example, while children were fasting, the rule was during lunchtime you stay in the cafeteria. That's highly unresponsive to a child who's fasting. So now schools have been much better now at saying during these times, or during any time if you need it, anybody can go and find these other spaces where you can also sit. If you're having food, you stay in the cafeteria. If you're not having food, here's some other places you can be. That is not only culturally responsive, but over time it has become culturally sustaining. It has been a place to say you are welcome here. Not only do you have to fight, you don't have to fight for that right anymore. You no longer have to try to prove to me that you need a separate spot. You don't need to be the one as a 10-year-old trying to advocate for what you need. I'm going to get ahead of that and tell you that as a 10-year-old, you are welcome to go sit in this other space while you're fasting. Okay, that's just one example. Another example is that in the US, at least, many of our children's storybooks feature little puppy dogs in people's homes. Clifford, Henry and Mudge, Snoopy, Goofy. I mean, it goes on and on and on and on and on. There are many. Biscuit, Spot. I can think of 10 examples of children with puppies. Now, I'm not saying don't read those stories. Go ahead and read them. But I think it's important to understand that for some kids, seeing puppies in the home could be, what? Who has puppies in the home? And that might take another layer of educating, or to say, for some of us, we have puppies in the home, right? Birthday parties. Not all of the cultures of the world celebrate birthdays the same way we do in the US, okay? So there are a lot of things that happen around birthdays. Again, being culturally responsive is more than just waiting for the kid to say, what's going on? It's kind of thinking ahead and saying, wait a minute, I have this student that has this. I wonder what that means. I wonder what that means. I wonder how this gets celebrated in these places, and do a little checking ahead of time. So we prioritize student learning and growth. We affirm students' cultural competence, that's the strength. And we develop critical awareness, which means that we are also trying to figure out, am I doing something that might, again, are we going to hit it 100%? No, I'm good with 50% if we can kind of keep trying, right? And then sometimes teaching demographics don't match those of their students. So in many of our poor schools, for example, or any setting, we might have, for example, white teachers teaching black students. Now, you learned a little bit of the history in the United States, but racial history is very fraught in the United States with a lot of problematic aspects. One problematic aspect, and I taught for 2 years in Jersey City, New Jersey, as a white woman, as a white teacher in a largely black and Hispanic school system. What that meant is that I was saying to kids, the ones with the power are white-skinned. Now, I didn't mean to say that. I wasn't saying it directly to them, but I was saying it indirectly. Our posters on the wall were indirectly saying, you can be these things if you're white, but not so much if you're black, right? So what we have to do then is to say, how do I address this? How do I figure this out? So there are a lot of ways to do that. One is by saying to students, you be the teacher today, because anybody can be the teacher, right? One might be to say, let's celebrate some of the cultural things that happen. I shared the example of the girl who came in and said, a white person killed Martin Luther King. Even if these were first graders talking about social justice, talking about power, talking about who has what, okay? These were first graders. I had one little boy come in and he said, you know, I slashed a tire on a car the other day. And I said, why would you do such a thing? And he said, because I'm angry. And I said, why are you angry? Were you angry at the car? What are you talking about? He said, I'm angry because it was a white person in a car, and a lot of us don't have cars. I said, okay, so let's find a better solution than slashing a tire, how about, right? Because that doesn't help anything. Now you've committed a crime. I mean, he was a little kid, but I said, let's not do that ever again. Let's think of other solutions. But your anger is real. And your anger probably has some legitimate back cause to it. But that person driving that car isn't the one you need to be. Let's think about how we change systems. Let's think about power structures. We had a long conversation. So don't kid yourself. Even very small people pick up messages very early on. And when we don't match that of our students, how many of you had elementary teachers, primary teachers who were male? Raise your hand. A couple of you? How many male elementary teachers did you have?
I had 3. They were for sports.
They were for sports.
Yeah.
Okay. How about you? 1 for sports.
One for Hindi subject and one for sports.
Okay. And 1 for what? Craft. Okay. How many of you had overwhelmingly female teachers in primary or elementary school? Right. Exactly. Same is true in the US. Same is true in the US. Now, if you are a male studying, what you learn pretty early on is that education is the domain of women, which often sometimes means that literacy is also the domain of women, which means that our boys, and by the way, I'm very aware that I'm setting up a binary here, and I want you all to know that I believe that there's more beyond the binary, but for the sake of this class and for this program, we're going to stay with boys, girls, but I just want you to be aware. So what happens is that the demographics of the teaching doesn't necessarily always match those of their students. So if I'm a female teacher who grew up believing that the system worked for me and that I'm now a teacher and I'm working with little boys, do we know who gets in trouble more in classrooms? Who gets in trouble more in classrooms? Boys, by far, by far. Boys get much more disciplinary practices and they're much more severe. And that's true in the US. I'm guessing it's probably true here, but I don't know that for sure. I know that when our demographics don't match our students, we don't understand sometimes. So when I see an active little boy in my first grade class, I say, that's it. I've had it with you. You are driving me nuts. You've just done 3 things that are all over the place. Go, out. Instead of saying, how about if we all jump up and down for a few minutes? Because what would it feel like to be that little boy, right? Just trying to get some energy out. So I had to learn, and I am telling you, I was so naive. I was fresh out of college. I had no idea, but I had all these little active little boys. And so I just started being like, I can't keep telling these boys they're in trouble. That's a terrible thing to keep telling my boys. Now, it's not that girls can't be trouble, and it's not that all boys are, so be careful. It's not an either or. The point is that statistics show overwhelmingly we also are harsher towards, in the US, children of color than white children. Okay, we are far more, and we also have discriminatory actions based on class structure, okay, based on socioeconomics. So there are things that might happen. So whenever I've sat at meetings as a parent, I always say, I'm not just here for my kid, I'm here for all of the kids, or I'm here for any of those kids who might up in this situation. So when I'm there advocating for my son with autism, I say, I'm not just here for my kid, I'm here for any child that might be in this situation. I say that every single time. Whenever I was in a meeting as a parent, I would say that. Because my feeling is there are some people, I can leverage what I have, but some people can't, and some parents can't, okay? So when we don't match our students' demographics, that may be that you don't understand their religion. It might be that you don't understand their home life. It might be that you don't understand their language. It might be that you don't understand their gender. Okay. Instead of saying, I don't understand it and therefore I'm blocking it, how about I don't understand it and I could learn? How about I don't understand it, but I'd like to know more? How about I don't even believe in whatever you believe in? Okay, but maybe I could at least hear you. Okay, maybe I could hear you. Maybe I can just think about it. Maybe I can what? Hold it with an open hand. Okay, this happens all the time. And this is one of the places where we say, yeah, but I don't, that student that's blind, I can't deal with that student in the classroom. Maybe you just need to learn about what it means to be blind. And I don't mean walk around with a blindfold on. Talk to the student, find out, get more information, all right? And then the impact of our expectations change based on what we believe. So if I've got that active little boy, my expectations may end up being lower for that child. And now I've harmed that child on the basis of gender, solely on the basis of gender. I don't mean to. I don't wake up in the morning going, wonder who I could pick on today. Nobody, I hope no teacher ever wakes up doing that. This is what I try to tell people. Nobody does it. Remember I told you have a philosophy whether you know it or not? So we better find out what it is. We don't do it on purpose. Nobody wakes up in the morning and goes, I bet I can really get at that kid for not writing their names, the group names on their lab report. Nobody wakes up doing that. We're living. But we're living based in what? Our rivers. Okay? All right. We're going to stop there, and we will come back after a small break. We will give you all some time to think and study. We'll have some time for questions, and we'll just make sure we have anything else to wrap up here. Okay? All right. Take a little bit of a break. I didn't build in a slide. Tea break. All right, so for this next section, there are a few things I want to cover, and then I also want to tell you that you all have had a lot of questions that are really important questions, and some of them are very cultural and context-specific questions about who you are, what you're learning, what you're teaching, those kinds of things. So I want to make sure we have time for that. We also will have an assessment in our next session. I mean, this afternoon, like next, okay, after our break, after our next break, which means that you all also may have questions about the materials that we've covered and how that is going to go for you. So we also want to make sure you have time for that, all right? I have a couple of small things that I want to continue to finish up with you all, or maybe not so small, but some things that are kind of more around differentiation, and I have one cartoon activity that I want you to do. So I'm going to back up. You can't read these, and I knew when I put this slide in that it was going to be not very readable, but it's multilingual learners. And again, I was very struck by the question about the fact that you all might not necessarily think of language as a minority in and of itself in a classroom, whereas back home we really do, and we have to work very hard to make sure that our language learners are accommodated. Having said that, you all are very multilingual, and you have people from all over that may or may not have different levels of skills around language. And so I can't read all of these, but the point is that, oh, this is so blurry, I'm having trouble. Wait a minute, hold on, I can do it from here. So pronounce names, know how to pronounce names is one of them, right? Engaging students in structured conversation or talk is the next one where they're talking together. Then provide access to grade level curriculum. That's just curriculum kinds of things. Embrace and love them. So there's a whole actual, believe it or not, there's an entire literature around love in the classroom, and it's a kind of love and care that is built on educational philosophy. It's not just like this loosey-goosey kind of feel to it. If you want to know more, the work of Nell Noddings is around care in the classroom, and there are people who promote a philosophy of saying that we fundamentally start at care. And so there's just a variety of different things on here that I know you can't see, but I wanted to include the slide because it talks a lot about what we already are doing, encouraging drawing, providing small group instruction, which we've done. So remember that if you had language challenges or even learning differences, to be within those groups is a safer way, and it also ensures that you are actively engaged, right? Collaborate with colleagues, set high expectations. So there's a variety. The point of including this was not that we were going to read every single thing, but it was more to help you understand that there is an entire movement, again, on how do we address multilingual learners. And we, again, have sometimes heard them as ELL, which are English language learners back home, or ML, which is multilingual, or those kinds of things. So there's varying ways to refer to that category, but it's one that we do consider to be part of culturally responsive teaching. By the way, did you all do your rivers? Did some of you, we have to remember to collect their rivers. Yeah, why don't you, can we collect, yeah, if you did your rivers, make sure your name is on them. We'll collect those. So the last piece, remember we did the chart for Tomlinson, which was differentiated instruction. We did universal design. We did culturally responsive. And the last model that I wanted to share with you today, and there are many, but the last one that I think is very common is social emotional learning, which is SEL. So again, you may have heard of this. It may be something that you have heard of within the field of either psychology or education. Social emotional learning is what we now understand is, again, it's going to sound a lot the same. These are different frameworks that are established. The best source for social emotional learning is this source, casel.org, which is where this chart comes from. But on this website, this chart is interactive. You can click on any one of these things and pop up more information. It's highly interactive on this website. And I cannot stress enough, this is the site I go to whenever I'm teaching about SEL or wanting to learn more about SEL. And the interactive wheel is quite useful. It gives definitions, it gives reflection, all sorts of things you can do. But in short, and we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to really just kind of encapsulate social emotional learning. We believe that we want to develop healthy identities and we want people to be able to manage their emotions. Okay, let's looking at those first couple of spots. But we also tend to assume that students are coming in already able to do that. And that's not always true. In fact, we are all always working on what I call building our toolkit. We have our strategies in our toolkit, but we have to build the toolkit. So if I have a student who is not managing their emotions at any age or stage of the game, I can't simply say to that student, manage your emotions, please. I see you're not managing your emotions. Could you do that now? Right? It's like asking, what is it? It's like doing it without a coat hook. Manage your emotions. Oh, it fell down again. Manage it again. It fell down again. Right? We were talking before at the break about attendance concerns, right? And that's a whole other ball of wax in many systems. But if I just say get to class and it falls down, get to class and it falls down, get to class and it falls down, then we need to build some coat hooks. So we have talked about academic coat hooks. We have talked about subject matter coat hooks, but we're going to change the focus to talk about social emotional coat hooks, okay? Because that zone of proximal development also exists for our emotions. We can feel safe and comfortable, we can feel thrown off the top of the cliff, and it may have nothing to do with the subject matter, it may have to do with our lives, okay? So it's not enough to simply say, manage that emotion. The one thing you probably shouldn't do to somebody who's in crisis or in meltdown is to say, pull it together, right? Stop that. I don't know, in the history of the world, I doubt that stop that has ever actually done much to stop whatever that behavior is. When we are in fight or flight emotionally, our amygdala goes off. And I'm not a psychology person. Some of you may have studied the brain more than I have, but this much I know. And I know this in part from having a child on the autism spectrum, because autism mirrors trauma, even though there has not been trauma, because what happens is it sets the amygdala off too quickly. Okay, so it might be that you didn't get the cereal you thought you were going to get, or somebody asked you to find your lab partner names, and all of a sudden your alarm has gone off that you're in great danger. When your amygdala goes off, that is a protective element in the human brain. It's important. If right now a fire broke out, we would not be sitting here analyzing and thinking. We would be getting out. So that fight or flight response is important to human survival. But it backfires when we are expected to not have it go off and to be part of this other zone of learning, whether that's emotional, whether it's academic. When the amygdala goes off, it sends out that alarm, whoop, 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 whoop. When that alarm goes, the frontal lobe of learning shuts down. It will not happen at the same time, which means that if there's a fire that suddenly starts and I tell you to start reciting your times tables, you may know your times tables, but you will not be able to do it while you're trying to get out of a burning room. You will not. Your learning shuts down because this has sabotaged all of the systems. It has commandeered it. I shouldn't say sabotage, because it actually is a useful thing for us a lot of the time. There are times we need that to go off. It keeps us safe. The problem is when it goes off, when it either doesn't need to, or when we don't know how to manage it, okay? When that happens and they shut down, that's why saying to somebody, can you stop that now, really doesn't, you can't, you're not talking reason. Your reason has shut down. And I use the example of autism only because I've watched how that happens when somebody goes into that mode very quickly, but it can be anything. We have a great number. We've been doing, one of the things I don't have up here but fits into social emotional is trauma-informed practices, trauma-informed teaching. We have a great number of kids coming from trauma situations. Any child, adult, teenager who is in a refugee environment has as its base trauma. You are not a refugee unless you have faced trauma. Okay, fundamentally the definition of refugee. So when I talk about 30% of our population locally being in schools, being English language learners, they are also almost exclusively from trauma circumstances. That's not the fault of their parents. That's sometimes because their parents were trying to keep them safe. Okay? So trauma is not necessarily they have a bad home life. It might be that they have a very good home life that got them to safety. But what it does mean is that the amygdala is going off a lot more quickly and a lot more inconsistently than maybe we think is healthy. Okay? We have all, probably through our lives, had times that we have felt that alarm go off in our brains. Okay? The minute it does, the learning shuts down. So if I'm just yelling at somebody to pull it together, or even if I'm not yelling and saying, get this math done, and then you're free to go, I am working against the odds. There will never be a solution to that. What I need to do first is get this to calm down. That's where we start to build skill sets for students. To simply say, calm it down, it's like me saying, can you start speaking Russian? Now, come on, let's go. You will say, no matter how many times, the coat just keeps dropping. So we can build coat hooks that are social emotional coat hooks as well. I will give you some examples. I will give you some examples in the case of my son with autism, first of all, because these have worked so extraordinarily well that he now has better coping skills than most of the human beings I know on this planet, okay? Strategy number 1, breathe. We've all been told that, right? Just breathe. But actually taking some breaths can help to settle that a little bit. Okay, so just start by some breathing. Another thing I often tell people, or students, or whoever, is to say, take a walk around and come back. So actually leave the space, because it feels unsettling, leave the space and come back. What I've said in classrooms before is, go on down to the washroom, splash some water on your face, whatever you need to do, and come back. Okay, just get out for a second. Not forever, come back. Just go down to the washroom and come back. Another thing is a buddy system. I've often said to people, would you like a friend to go with you? Okay, because sometimes we get very worried about being alone in those situations. Again, I'm not trying to reason anything. I'm not trying to say you don't need to go to the washroom right now, or you don't need a friend with you right now. What I'm saying is we've got to get this calmed down before we're going to have a conversation. So I often will say, would you like a buddy or a partner to go with you? Or would you like to just sit quietly with a partner somewhere? Okay. Another thing my son does is he knows he has, well, and this was something we can do in schools, is there were safe spaces in the school. My son loves music, so the music room was a safe space for him. So if he was anywhere close to the music room, he could say, I need to go to the music room, and he could just go, and it was a place to be and breathe for a minute, and he could come back. Okay, so the music room was a safe spot. So there were a few safe spots around that people could kind of go to. You could set up a safe spot in your classroom. I mean, you don't have to, you could say, well, we don't have anything like that. Well, sure, you can set up a little corner with a beanbag chair or something. I don't know what you could do, but you could probably figure out some way to say, there's the safe spot. You can go use the safe spot if you need to, right? There are many, many things we can do to build a coat hook to say, okay, now, and we also, there's something I've done with little kids before where you do a light system. So you have a red light, a yellow light, and a green light. And you can actually even have one up. You can have one at the front of the room. You can have one at people's desks. You can have them inside notebooks. And you just have a red, a yellow, and a green. And you can say to somebody, where are you right now? I'm in green. I'm good. I'm fine. You could say, I'm in yellow. I'm in yellow. It's going to start to be a thing. Okay, I'm in red. I've shut down. Okay, and so you can actually have students start to self-assess where they are on their stoplight. So this is not an uncommon tool to use when you're trying to help with regulation. You're helping with that regulation. Now, it might feel silly for me to say to you all as college students or as adults who are teaching to say, where are you right now? But you can do the same on a 1 through 5 scale. I can say on a scale of 1 to 5, how are you feeling right now, okay? Or you can do it with a hand up, okay? This means I'm fine, everything's going well. You can set up your own system, I mean, whatever. This means I'm starting to stress, uh-oh, I'm done. So I could say, everybody hold your hand up about how you're feeling right now, and everybody's gonna show me, and I can glance around the room, and if somebody's somewhere above a 3, I'm gonna start to say, do I need to check in with that student? Universal design says I can ask everybody that. I know for sure, let's just say, again, I'm just using this as an example, I know for sure that you're more likely to be at a 5, and you're more likely to be at a 5, but I can do it for everybody, and I can keep my eyes particularly on the ones that I'm worried about. Now, eventually, students start to do that for themselves, even to the point, remember I told you I went in to buy a sorry and I said, I'm above my ZPD. There's a point where students can go, I'm at a 3, okay? I'm okay right now, but I'm heading towards a 4, right? Students can start to say it. The more we do that, the more we're building the code hook so they can start to build their own code hook, okay? You might have a safe person that you know is there for you in some way, shape, or form, and that's also a fair thing to do. To this day, my son on the autism spectrum is 29 years old. To this day, if he's having a very hard moment and he's feeling like he's creeping towards a 4, he will call me or he'll text me. And all he needs to do is say, I'm having a tough time right now. I'll figure this out and talk with you later. He just knows that this, so when I'm in India, I always worry, I tell him, you can always text me that. It's one of his safety zones. He's building a toolkit for himself so that he can be successful. Again, he's one of the most successful people in terms of toolkit building because we worked on it with him since he was 5 years old or before, right? We started with a stoplight, then we moved on to a 5-point system, then we moved on to, so you can do that kind of thing with a whole class. So we need to build, we do not want to assume that students are coming in already knowing all of this, right? So if somebody's rude to another person, let's say, we don't just say, you know better. We say, what did you just do there and why did you think that was your best answer, right? Or what do we need to do next time? Or what does that mean? So sometimes people simply do not know, or sometimes they do know and they're reacting, right? So building that toolkit means that the next time around I say, remember what we talked about? What do we need to do? Okay, so we can help to build this in our classrooms as part of, now a lot of people are gonna say, I don't have time for that, it's one more thing to think about. What I'm trying to say is, doing any of these things that I just did actually makes my life a lot easier in a classroom and doesn't take to have you do a hand signal. Everybody do that right now. How are you feeling right now on a scale of this to this? Just honestly, and so, okay, how about this? How about if students are embarrassed to put up a hand? Everybody put your heads down on your desks. Go ahead, put your heads down. Put your heads down. Put your hands up with a 0 through 5 on how you're feeling right now. Everybody, how you're feeling for your stress levels, how you're feeling for things. All right, put your heads back up again. Now, to put your head down means nobody has to ever be embarrassed. Nobody ever has to say, oh, I can't put my hand up at a 3 because everybody else around me is 0, right? So I actually do that a lot with students. I'll say, put your heads down. Pre-COVID, when COVID was just coming into being out of class, it was extremely anxious. It was pretty clear that, I always said it was the zombie apocalypse, right? I kept saying, it's not the zombie apocalypse, and then it kind of was. And then I said to them, okay, put your heads down. How many of you are worried about a family member? And they put their hands up. How many of you are scared for your own health? Put your hands up. How many of you are worried about your academic progress right now? Put your hands up. With the heads down, they were a lot more able to be honest about what was really happening. And it was, I don't have a solution to all of that. What I'm teaching is code hooks. I'm not going to take a stress away. Sorry, I can't solve COVID. What I can do is help you start to do a better assessment of where we build our toolkits. And then I say this, I don't leave it at that. I say, how many of you can think of one strategy to help you cope with that anxiety? Again, heads down. Raise your hand if you can think of a strategy. And then I can see who's got strategies and who doesn't. How many of you think you're getting enough sleep at night? raise your hand. Again, all of this with your head down so nobody's embarrassed, nobody's feeling on the outs, nobody's going to get picked on, okay? What I'm doing in those exercises, and I do them pretty regularly with my students as the term goes on, especially if I sense a lot of high stress, I say, can you all think of a thing to do to help your stress? And then if I see that somebody can't think of one, I'll touch base with them separately, or I'll send them a quick email. I noticed you didn't have your hand up. Do you have somebody who's a support, or do you need something to be triggered in the system? So social emotional learning involves all of these different kinds of things. Your own self-awareness, which is how am I feeling right now? What does it mean? What does send me into stress? How much sleep do I need? Did I eat breakfast this morning? Okay, that's self-awareness. Self-management, do I have tools in my toolkit? If not, how do I build them? Responsible decision-making, am I able to make decisions? By the way, decision-making is really about self-efficacy. I often use the example, I drive a lot, and Maine has a lot of very rural roads. And I used to worry a lot about like my car breaking down somewhere. Now with phones, it's a lot better because I have AAA, I have supports in place. But I used to ask myself, if I get a flat tire, actually, I do know how to change a flat tire. But aside from that, the bigger question isn't whether I know how to do it. It's whether I know how to access somebody who does know how to do it. Do I know how to problem solve so that I'm not in despair if something were to happen? Do I have somebody I can call? Do I know that I know where to get that information? So decision making is really not necessarily about having to solve everything. It's just about knowing how to be have self-efficacy, which means kind of being able to, you don't have to be independent. You don't have to know how to do everything. You just need to know how to contact somebody who does, okay? Relationship skills, again, kind of like, do you know when you're being mean? Do you know that what you said was inappropriate? Or do you know when, you're hurting somebody's feelings? Do you know how to build those relationship skills? Social awareness, this is the one that autism spectrum, by the way, I just saw we have a rate of 1 in 31 now in the US for autism spectrum. Now we're better at diagnosing, and you can have high and low spectrum and all of that, but social awareness is a big one. Not knowing, how do you say hi to somebody? How do you pick a seat coming into the classroom? These are the kinds of things that undo some people. They come into the classroom on the first day and they're like, oh my gosh, panic. How do I pick a seat? Okay, I'll sit here. No, wait a minute. I can't sit there. Somebody must be there. There's a plate there. I'll sit over here. No, that person might not like me. I better not sit there. Well, if I go over there and I have to use the bathroom and washroom, now I've got to get across the room. I better not sit there. Just sitting down can be anxiety producing, right? So what is our social awareness around kind of interacting with the social world? We are social beings. So there are social deficits that a lot of people have that we have to kind of help build toolkit, okay? And then there's lots of things. We can build the climate in the classroom. We can actually teach some of this instruction. We have school-wide culture, which means our school as a whole, the building as a whole, the place as a whole, a department as a whole. How do we make that? We can do authentic partnerships, which means we have real connections to the world around us to practice this, and we align our learning opportunities. And all of these things through CASEL are actually linked for more ideas, okay? And again, just feeling and showing empathy, establishing and maintaining support, making responsible and caring decisions. At the end of the day, you can say, I don't know, I give up, I don't know what to do for any of this. But we don't really want to we don't want to victimize ourselves, right? And at the end of the day, that works for the short term, but it doesn't work in the long term. Long term says, I have to take ownership of my behaviors, but I might need help, okay? So this model is another one to think about. Okay, I'm going to stop with that. Do you have questions about this idea? Do you understand what this is all about? Do you understand that some of it is just in the way we set things up and manage? Some of it's just in keeping your ears open. If somebody's picking on somebody, say, no, we don't do that, and you pull somebody aside. Or if somebody's saying, I'm in stress, then we work with that and manage it. What do you need to do right now to de-stress that? It's always better if the student themselves or the person can come up with the idea, right? What could you do right now? That could breathe. Yes, that's a great idea. Why don't you breathe? I could go to the washroom and come back. Yeah, that's a great idea. Now, I might have to set some of that up initially. Scaffolding, okay? All right. Any questions about any of this? Okay, the last thing I want to do is actually take you to, oh, this is not a break. Sorry. Joking. I am going to go down to this. Has anybody ever seen this cartoon before? Raise your hand if you have. Okay, some of you have. I'm going to do a small group activity, and then we're going to close this out so we have time for questions and for other things. In this cartoon, and again, notice I verbalize what's on the cartoons because some people visually may have more challenge, but to do that helps everybody. Universal design, hello, right? So we have a person sitting at a desk, and he's saying for a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. And we have a variety of animals, all the way from this little bird, all the way through to the dog, whose task it is, the exam, is to climb the tree. Now, there's a pretty traditional way of looking at this. First of all, just tell me what you think. What do you think this cartoon is trying to say? Anybody? What do you see here? There's bias in a way, because who's going to climb the tree best? Probably the monkey. Who else has an advantage? The bird can fly up there. Okay. What else do you see here? Is this, yeah.
Not everybody has the same ability, so assessing on the same standard would be correct.
That's the way we normally think of this.
Continuing her point that we should have the different standards of assessment for this particular task.
Okay.
People,
All right. So here's where we get to the crux of the biscuit, which is this. We look at this and say exactly that, which is the standard is not fair to everyone. But I want to back ourselves out of that, and I want to rethink this. Remember what I said about trying to keep our standards the same? If my classroom, this is what people argue. Well, I mean, the fish is never going to get it. The fish doesn't belong in this classroom. This is not a good classroom. This classroom has to be all monkeys. The minute we do that, we've just shut that classroom out to everybody who isn't a monkey. All right, fine, we'll take the birds too. They can fly up. I don't care. Fine. The minute we do that, we've just gone against everything we've been working so hard to do, which is to say, I want all of these in my classroom. So now I have another issue. The dog, the seal, the penguin, the elephant, how in the world are we going to manage? The question isn't whether we need different standards. Flip it. Flip it. The question is not if we need other standards. Let's keep the standard the same. Let's say they need to get to the top of, let's rework this. You don't need to climb the tree. I'm going to change it to be, please get to the top of that tree. Now I want you turning and talking. You can do groups of 3 or 4. I'm fine with that. Groups of 3 or 4. And I want you to say, how will we help everybody get to the top of the tree? Are you answering that question? Okay, but get in your groups and talk about that. That's exactly right. We are not going to change the standard. We're going to keep the standard. The standard is everyone must reach the top of the tree. Top of that tree is your test. The top of the tree, there it is. Now turn and talk and figure out what are we going to do, because we've got a classroom full that have to get to the top of that tree. I'm not booting anybody out of my classroom. Be creative. Keep going. Be as creative as you can be. Anything goes. Be as creative as you want to be. Make sure you're including everybody, okay? Make sure everybody gets there. Your job is to make sure everybody gets there. All right? Okay, let's come back around. You are not allowed to have anybody leave the classroom. I'm sorry, but that's not allowed. We believe in differentiated instruction. We also are not going to just tell the goldfish that it just gets to splash around while everybody else climbs the tree. That's not what we're doing. We are getting everybody to the top of that tree to the very best of our abilities. So let's start with what you were about to say before we broke into groups. Change the process. Aha! How might we do that?
We can put them in groups, so we can keep the monkey in one group and then penguin in one group and then elephant and seal in one group.
Oh, we could group them in a way so they could work collaboratively. That's a great idea. How about from this side of the room? What's something somebody came up with over here?
We were thinking that they could help each other, all of them out. Like if the deer elephant uprooted the tree entirely.
Okay. All right. Now we've got somebody. We've got the elephant that's going to uproot the tree so that it can help some of the people, like the dog, might then be able to reach the top of it because we can put the tree in a different position. Exactly right. What else? Tell me anything else you all thought of. As crazy as you want to be.
I might be wrong completely.
No, you're never wrong.
But as a teacher, what would I fear as an inclusive education that I will not change the standard.
Right, you don't change the standard.
That cannot be changed, but I'll keep the standard same. What I'll see assessing is that I'll assess individually
Okay.
all the students
Okay.
in their own parameters, like how much monkey can do that.
Okay, so we set within their ZPDs, I could actually set slightly different parameters. Let's keep going. What are some other ideas? What did you were going to say something?
It was similar to that.
Okay.
Like the elephant would bring the tree down. So that
The elephant can bring the tree down. What else?
maybe like they help each other and maybe not the elephant may not just be up there, but its trunk may be big enough.
Okay, so maybe we're grading it on the team as a whole. So maybe the elephant is lifting something to the top, and we can still give the elephant some credit for getting that exactly. Yep.
Okay, that will sound funny,
Yeah.
but it's okay even if they reach the shadow of the tree stump. Like,
The shadow? Oh, I haven't heard it. I've done this exercise so many times. Nobody has ever suggested the shadow of the tree. No one has ever suggested that. Bravo. The shadow of the tree maybe could work, right? Maybe there's a way to think about what's the shadow of the tree metaphorically. What else?
We can also we can use table or chairs for.
Could use table. There's tools around us we might use. What if we've got a table and a chair here? Yes. Why don't we use some supports in place that literally scaffold, right? We were actually building a scaffolded set of steps to help people get up there. All right. We still have a problem with this poor little fish unless the elephant lifts it up. Anybody think of, yeah.
Can the monkey just take the fish with him?
Okay, maybe the monkey just takes the fish on up. Anything else we could think of? Okay, all right. Yeah, exactly. We just stack them all up. Think outside the box. Can we change the environment? Can we change the environment?
Yeah, so if everyone goes up and now the elephant is down, what if the elephant takes the desk, stands on the desk, and then manages to reach the top of the tree
Yes.
with its trunk?
Yes.
And it just holds on to it. Because it's
Hold on to it with its trunk. Right?
Up.
Okay, so we get the steps up, we get to the top, we get the elephant with its trunk. Still something we can do to change this environment.
We can maybe say that go and gather food, so we can put the fish in the water and say, oh, gather food, and maybe that can be a goal.
Oh, maybe the fish is, although that does change the standard. However, leaning into that, we could say that the fish actually supports the others in other ways, such as getting food, let's say, for sustenance. If the fish needs water, could we build some systems of water so the fish can swim to the top of the tree? Could we maybe make sure that if the tree comes down, that some of it's in the water?
Maybe very funny, but then can we change the top with the water?
Can we change the top with the bottom so that maybe we actually are starting with yeah, so everybody's kind of equal there. But then are we learning or are we in our comfort zones? That's the question there. Zero gravity environment. There you go. There you go. See, now that's thinking like a scientist. Can we maybe change the environment? So I've had people say things like we could rig up a water system, right? Or we could flood the whole area. Now, I don't know if all of these animals could survive a water environment, but most of them could. I think the bird could too. I think most of these animals could survive a water environment, right? So we're not just helping the fish. We might actually be helping a number, the seal and the penguin might also really thrive and flourish. So, and maybe what I do is I have more than one test for that top of the tree so that maybe if we do have some things that are still a little bit unfair or unequal, maybe the next test is actually swimming across or getting across a river. And then that represents maybe another standard or another thing we're trying to get to. And then we draw another, because is this fish without skills? No, it's not without skills. It's just without the skill to climb that tree, right? Is the dog without skills? No. We think the monkey's got it all, but wait till that monkey has to fit inside a little place, right? Little space. Maybe that's one of the tests or so on. The point is, the fish has needs and strengths, okay? This poor little seal has some needs here. Okay, right? So I want you to flip your thinking about something like this. Again, just kind of work symbolically. We don't always have every answer for every one of these, but think about this as a classroom. We do not, our first answer is not to say, monkey gets the A+, I just want the class of monkeys next term. That's not what we're talking about all week long. We've been talking about saying, this goldfish is very welcome in my class because guess what I don't know much about? I don't know much about surviving in water. If I do know more about it, I might be able to create a system that allows that fish to succeed. So I want you, as we're working with people, to always imagine that you have some monkeys, some birds, some fish, and some elephants all in front of you or working with you. And we don't want to say, sorry, elephant, I don't have any room, I can't take you. We can change an environment, we can change a process, we can change the affect, we can change all sorts of different ways. We can change a product. Maybe we could have them draw the top of the tree. I don't know if the fish can draw. We could have them dance the top of the tree, right? Okay. All right, we're going to close out there with that section. Yes?
When we change the environment and we change the settings in favor of all, I'm sure the monkey is going to get mad.
Yes.
And this generally happens in
Yes,
class.
yes, it does. Yes, it does. Yeah, the monkey's going to be pretty bummed out. Wow, I had that A really wrapped up. The monkey, he is definitely the happiest. Look at the penguin's like, oh. The fish, I never thought about that. The fish is like, oh. The monkey's like, got it. All right, the point is a fair one. This monkey's going to be really bummed out. So I have to also take care of my monkey here, okay? And I need to take care of my monkey's social emotional well-being. Maybe this monkey needs to learn to share a little bit. Maybe this monkey needs to learn that they're in the world with a whole lot of other people. And maybe the monkey needs to learn that not every task is getting to the top of the tree. Monkey's going to have a harder time. Like I said, maybe there's a different task. So I might say to this monkey, you can be angry, you can be worried, you can be upset, but it doesn't diminish your capacity to allow the fish to also reach the top of the tree. Now, in a competitive market-based world, it does in some ways. The monkey says, now I don't have a chance at the job I want because all these people can do my job. So I would say to that, well, then maybe we need to rethink what you see as the value of your education, right? It might take a conversation. It might mean taking good care of the monkey as well, okay? We don't want to let the monkey feel that, oh, well, you know, we don't care about the monkey. We do, okay? But yeah, the monkey's going to be a little bummed out, right? And we do see that. That's a very fair point. Actually, that's another one that people haven't talked about really much.
You were talking about needs and strengths.
Yes.
So each one of them have their own strengths. So
Correct.
If they say that this is the first assignment, next assignment, someone
Right.
else's strength might not.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So I make sure when I build my curriculum, it's not always the tree that they're reaching the top of. It's not always going to be that process. That's what I mean about we can change things. So for some of these people that works, for some it doesn't. We'll just figure that out as we go. Yeah, very nice. Yeah, did you?
So, in the same context, in that case, the fish and the penguin, these
Yep.
children, they don't have the 4 hooks over there. How to start with it because they don't
Right.
have the skill set.
Right. So now what we have to do is back it way out. Maybe what we do initially is give them some kind of artificial something that builds that, right? Like, I mean, if we're really being crazy and we let anything go, right? What do they need? They might need to have, again, they may need a partner, right? Or they might need, if they're going to build a code hook, maybe what they need to do is think about building a muscle in a certain way, right? So we might have to back it out, but yeah. And are there times that we may just simply say we just did everything we could and we're just not quite there? The point about this is the way it's worded and the way we think about it is that it's, first of all, that exams are unfair, and they're not always unfair. They are a data point, okay? The second thing is that we could read this that not everybody, that everybody's static in what their gifts and strengths and needs are. And that's also not true. The third thing that we tend to assume is that some of these people just simply don't belong in these learning environments. And we just want to ask ourselves, we want to say that's not true. We want to think about ways we can make that not true. And so when we flip it around, it puts, oh, that was the other thing I was going to say. It also puts the full responsibility on these students to figure it out. And when we flip it, it puts some responsibility on us to manage that environment. It puts the responsibility on us to say, could I help this goldfish get to the top of the tree? This is where sometimes teachers say, it's not my responsibility, that's not my classroom. But what I'm saying is it's actually a much more joyful place. It's a much more greater place of joy and hope and care if we do say that and take that responsibility. Why are we teaching if it's not for the goldfish, right? And for the poor monkey who's going to feel really, really sad. Yeah. Yes, exactly. And so I once heard a great quote from a principal, a school principal, who said, we believed, they were all about reaching the standards, and they really had this going on, and they were trying to figure out how to reach the standards for everybody. And what they said was, we often put students out on a limb. I mean, speak about a tree metaphor. We often put students out on a limb, and this principal said, I believe that we need to be on the limb with them, because we're not going to saw ourselves off, right? So that's always stuck with me. Are we out on the limb with that student? So if we're putting a student out on a limb, are we there with them? And that principal's comment really struck me, that we need to be on the limb with the student, okay? Otherwise, we're really inclined to just saw that limb off and not worry about it. But if we're on the limb with the student, we're not going to do that. That places some of the onus onto the teacher, right? Okay, I am going to wrap that up. I'd like to turn our attention to the fact that we have an assessment coming up. We have a lot that we've covered. We have a little bit more tomorrow around assessment, actually, so we can think about that in light of, we're going to look at how do we build assessments, how do we think about assessments, what are rubrics. So I have a little bit on that. Let's kind of turn our attention, to maybe, I think the best thing would be to question anything that's kind of, we haven't had a lot of time to process together on the larger questions that might be emerging for people. Does that make sense? We can end this session with the taping and then, okay. So we're going to close out on the video.